Thank you, Dan and Aaron, with us today with your special music. So appreciative of that. Okay, so today it's September, if you believe that. And our whole theme for this month is facing the fear. And today we're going to talk about how faith plays into that, a question of faith. And so I thought it was a timely topic for me this week. During this week, one of our members, who's a teacher with Loudoun County Public Schools, shared her excitement at the start of the year about how each year the school system does a training in inclusivity and diversity and equity and having tolerance for those who might not be like us. And we were sharing about how wonderful it was that our school system was, doing this work and taking it seriously. And then I believe the next day, we got word that flyers started circulating in the Leesburg area in Loudoun County, produced by a white supremacist group, attacking this curriculum that teaches tolerance, targeting directly white members of the community, white parents, to create fear and division. And that was unsettling. And then yesterday, a statement was released by the White House decreeing that all equity training be halted for federal employees, using very similar language as that of the white supremacist groups who printed those flyers. Now, take a nice deep breath with that, because I felt very disturbed and feel great concern. And yes, fear can come up. For the loss of the strides that might have been made to heal systemic racism and white supremacy in our country and a world. And so I thought it was timely that we talk about, what do we do with that fear? What do we do when, we see so much challenge going on in our world? And so I turned to Tara Brach, who's a Buddhist teacher, and she talks a lot about fear and love and acceptance. And she reminded me that, fear can be a trigger. It can either trigger reactivity or it can be a call to deepen attention. And I agree with Tara Brach when she says that there cannot be peace on earth. There cannot be social justice or equity or a true experience of oneness, which is the very foundation of our teaching, if we haven't attended to our fear. We haven't attended to our fear. So that flyer was produced in fear. The declaration from the president was no doubt a political stunt to play upon that fear among white voters. It literally denies any reality of systemic racism or white privilege in the US. It was, make no mistake, a dog whistle to white supremacists and white Americans who are fearful. It's in a blatant attempt to stuff the shame of our history back into the shadows. It denies the healing that needs to take place. And I just speak strongly about that as a spiritual leader. It's my job to speak out about our values and what we teach, and when it's not being brought forth in our world. So in order for something to be healed, it must be looked at and acknowledged. You can't clean an infected wound by just simply ignoring it or covering it with a Band-Aid. It needs healing light and cleaning and love and care. And this is hard work. Healing the wounds of our collective racism is hard work. It is scary and messy, but it can't be denied. We cannot go back into the shadows. So I think of these words by Tara Brach, that fear can either trigger reactivity or it can be called to deepen attention. So what needs our deeper attention? So let's look at what fear is. And I again turn to Tara Brach in her book, Radical Acceptance. She says, fear is the anticipation of future pain. It's the anticipation of pain, of loss. It's the anticipation of loss of life, loss of love, loss of health. This fear is played on by all kinds of things in our world. Religion plays on fear to keep us in line. It in some traditions teach us to fear God, fear punishment. We don't teach that. Thank God. Thank God, the God that is. Ernest Holmes said, "Thank God there is that the God that is taught isn't." So I'm paraphrasing, but we obviously believe in a divine presence of love and peace, and isn't a judgmental force that is punishing us. So, but it's still a very motivating force. It's stirs feared by political rhetoric. It's just I just pointed out. We have in our society a great fear of death, even though it's something that we all are going to experience. We still, sweep it aside. The fear of the other, which again we're seeing so strongly right now. So there's a reason we need fear, right? If Tara Brach says that without fear we would not be able to stay alive or thrive, and we know that is true. That a healthy fear can keep us safe. It could guide us to respond in healthy ways, and it's we wouldn't be here today if there wasn't an awareness of the dangers that might be lurking, and yet that can get pathologized. Tara Brach says fear can guide us to respond in a healthy way, or as we've all experienced, entrap us in this trance of fear that leaves us unable to act or feel this stress. Um, so what do we do with that, and how do we deal with the fear that isn't the healthy kind, that keeps us entrapped in this trance of fear? And Tara Brach talks about taking refuge, and I think of that in some ways as what is it that we have faith in, so that when we take refuge in certain ideas or beliefs or practices, we awaken and cultivate an inner experience of safety and belonging. So in Buddhism, there's three fundamental refuges. Um, they're called the Buddha, which is the awakened nature, the Dharma, which is the path or the way, and the Sangha, which is the community of spiritual aspirants. And so if I take those terms and I translate them into our terms, the first one is the Buddha nature, which is just the divine self, the truth of who we are. The historic Buddha, 2,500 years ago, attained enlightenment under the Buddha tree, or the Bodhi tree, not the Buddha tree, the Bodhi tree. Um, and and the way we attain that truth is really through our spiritual practice. That through if you do our spiritual mind treatment, our affirmative prayer, it's in those first steps, the first two steps of treatment. We take refuge in the divine and our own nature of that. That is the truth that we teach, that there is a divine presence, a power, an essence that moves through all things that we are a part of, and that this is eternal and ongoing, and that no matter what's going on in our outer world, there is something inside of us that is always perfect and always safe and always peaceful. I was reminded a couple of years ago, I've told the story about it. I had taken my son to a ropes course in West Virginia, and there was you know what a ropes course is, and you get harnessed up and then you climb on ropes up in the air, and it's can be really fun. But this little boy was just stricken with fear. And even though we could all see that he was completely safe, he had this harness on, he wasn't going anywhere, but he was just so fearful of stepping out. And his parents were down below and they were calling to him and trying to help him move forward. And all the kids were, they were kind of being patient because he was kind of, stuck in there. And the instructor came out and kind of tried to help him. And at one point he said to him, he said, just let go and lean back. And the little boy was so scared. And he just said, oh, look, see, you're tethered, you're attached to this harness. And so the boy, kind of let go and sat back. And there was this moment of realizing that he, even though he knew it intellectually, it was still a fearful thing for him to, to realize that he was completely connected, that he was totally safe and surrounded by love. The power of that, just being surrounded by so much love and people believing in him and trying to help him move through. And And I just it's such a great analogy for us in our own life, right? That even though the things that we're doing are scary, and sometimes we don't want to go out there, and sometimes it feels like we're on the edge. In reality, from a spiritual perspective, we are completely harnessed in. We're completely safe. Ah, and so this is the Buddha nature that we find refuge in, that we find faith in, that helps us with the fear that we might experience of knowing that divine presence, and that second part of that is to know that we're part of that source, that we know that we are capable of waking to this divine nature, so that we can experience this freedom and be released from fear. And so we take refuge in the truth of who we are and the truth of who I am. I take refuge. I have faith in the truth of my very being, regardless of what's going on in the world. That is something that's unshakable. Ernest Holmes defines faith in the Science Mind textbook in the glossary. He says, in spiritual terminology, faith means a belief in the presence of an invisible principle and law which directly and specifically responds to us. It's a belief in this invisible essence that responds to us, that lives through us, that expresses us, that responds to our beliefs and our actions and our words and our very essence. Ernest Holmes says faith is a mental attitude so inwardly embodied that the mind can no longer deny it. And this is what we saw with this little boy, that once he finally got that he was tethered, he was harnessed in, that his mind, the fearful mind of his, could no longer deny that he was safe and he could go about his path. This is so powerful of a thought for us to remember, that when we're in that place of fear, to be able to stop and connect with the divine truth of who we are. The second refuge, Dharma, means truth, the way of things, or the law of nature. And in our teaching, the truth that we hold onto the our practices. So Tara Brach says we take refuge in the skillful means that awaken us to our Buddha nature and to our natural wisdom and our compassion. So skillful means for us are the five pillars that we talk about, in our studies of prayer and meditation and circulation and service and study. So this power that's within us, this divine nature, we come to realize and access through the path, through our practice, and we take refuge, Tara Brach says, in whatever ways of paying attention help us awaken from the trance of fear and realize our true nature. So the way we do that in our teaching is to go back to these divine truths, to do our spiritual practice of connecting with the divine, to stop and center ourselves, as we did the first part of this talk today, our service, to center within the divine essence of who we are, to realize, to create that resilience within us. This is what we do through spiritual practice. I can't emphasize how important that is in our life right now, to practice these spiritual truths in our lives. And the third one is the Sangha, which is the community of people who walk on this path with us. So this is the most powerful aspect of it. It can be a one-on-one relationship with a healer or a counselor or a spiritual practitioner or a good friend. In the case of this little boy, he had the instructor come out and guide him and support him. He had his family down below that was encouraging him. He had all the other kids who patiently waited, or maybe continued on the path, being examples of what was possible if he could move through his fears. So taking refuge or having faith in community reminds us that we're in good company. Darbrach says we belong with all those who long to awaken, with all those who seek the teachings and practices that lead to genuine peace. So we have this Sangha, right? To help us, move us, uh, to conquer our fear and to express in more powerful ways. Tara Brach, she tells a story of a minister in Washington, D.C., who, after the 9/11 attacks, developed this fear of leaving her 6-year-old daughter home when she traveled, fearing that something would happen to her or her daughter. And when she would go to retreat, to meditation retreat, she found refuge in the Sangha, big enough to hold her fears, Tara Brach says. When I imagine all the other mothers, this mother said, around the world who cherish their children and right now might be experiencing the same fear, my heart feels different. This fear is still there, but even more profound is the feeling of shared compassion. She said that by taking refuge in the Sangha of mothers who so love their children, she awakened what the Taoists call the invincible shield of caring, the safety of abiding in the heart. Isn't that that's a powerful, powerful statement, isn't this invincible shield of caring? And that's what community does. That's what our connection in oneness does. That's when we I talked last week about knowing that others are like us, like me, this person is looking for love, like me, this person breathes air, that like me, there are others in this world who are feeling the same thing I'm feeling, and I can wrap myself up in that and be lifted up by that. We can take refuge and have faith in our CSL community. When we have a concern, we can reach out to each other in prayer. Here in our community, we ask for prayer. I know among my larger community with CSL ministers that at any moment, any time, I can reach out and there'll be somebody that will pray with me. Tara Brach in her book says, in facing intense fear, we need to be reminded that we are part of something larger than our own frightened self. We need to be reminded that we're part of something larger than our own frightened self. In the safe haven of belonging to others, we can begin to discover the sanctuary of peace that dwells within our own being. In that belonging, we can find that peace that dwells within us. When we are in fear, we lose that sense of belonging. When we're in fear, we're stepping into that habit of separation, of thinking that we're disconnected, thinking that we're alone, thinking that we don't have any power. But what is true is that we have this connection and belonging with others, and it has always been the power of the people that create change in the world. Tomorrow is Labor Day, and we see this as a celebration of American workers and our ability, our industry and ingenuity and ability to create all kinds of great stuff. But it actually had its start in revolution, really. During the rise of the Industrial Revolution, working conditions were atrocious. Long work days, not having any days off, children working in very dangerous settings, no safety regulations. Um, and now we take all that for granted, right? That we are going to have safe and working environments, that will have time off, that will be treated fairly. But that didn't just happen. It happened because people rose up, people spoke up, and there was challenge. There were clashes and protests. I was reading about this, and one in particular that helped this cause of creating Labor Day and the acknowledgement of labor happened in Chicago in 1894, May 11th. Workers at the Pullman Palace Car Company, which was a railroad car manufacturer in Chicago, went on strike to protest their low wages and their 16-hour work days. And on June 22nd, members of the American Railway Union joined their struggles by refusing to move Pullman cars from one train to another, which crippled the rail traffic across the country. The National Geographic reported this. They said that in Washington, D.C., politicians sought to placate the labor movement. At the time, federal legislation designated Labor Day a public holiday had been languishing in Congress for about 10 months. But to appease the strikers and their supporters, the Senate quickly passed the bill on June 22nd, and it passed the House, and President Cleveland at the time signed it into law on June 28, 1894. But although the holiday was set, and it was seemed to be a gesture in a time of crisis, Cleveland actually, just 3 days later, after signing this bill, he ordered federal troops to Chicago to end the boycott. And there was an uprising, and 30 people were killed by the National Guardsmen. 30 people to begin this process of creating safe labor situations in our country today. So this holiday that we celebrate by taking off and being with our families and having a cookout has this revolution. It has this roots in revolution. It has its roots in the Sangha, in the community coming together to create change for the good. So in the end, we were better for those who fought for safety and fairness during that time. In the end, our connection, our oneness, our care for each other prevailed. So we're in challenging times right now, and the next few months especially are probably going to continue to be so. For a transformation to begin, we both individually and as a country and as a world have to face these fears and acknowledge the wounds of systemic racism, of white supremacy, of white privilege. We have to be strong, and we have to stand in our resilience by remembering who we are, And even though there might be chaos and confusion, we can still stand in this truth of who we are, of harnessing that universal divine presence that lives inside of us. We can take refuge and have faith in this practice that we have. I can't emphasize this enough, how important it is to keep up your spiritual practice, taking a few minutes to meditate, to pray with each other, to circulate our good, to be in gratitude and be in service. The only way that God works is through us. So we are the answer to our prayers. We are the ones that, when we get aligned with the truth of who we are, when we do our spiritual practice so that we're building up our resilience, when we find our community, the people that go forward, this is how we make change in the world. We get politically active for candidates and causes that speak to our values, to the values that we hold dear within our teaching, to oneness, to kindness, to integrity. We continue to do our own personal work, whether it's to love yourself or forgive or find compassion or love for others. And probably most importantly, we stay connected to our community, to our Sangha, to our spiritual community, to our friends, to our neighbors. We have to have faith that the good rises up and acts within us, that the fear that is dividing our nation right now is calmed. The Buddha taught that our fear is great, but greater still is the truth of our connection. This is the time for us to step forth and acknowledge and move through our fear to find that greater connection of oneness, of connection, of practice, of community, and knowing that in that love wins. Let's take that into our prayer. Just like to close your eyes and just feel into the divine truth of who you are in this very moment. So it's in this moment that I just recognize the divine presence, that there is only one essence, one power, one energy that moves through all things. This is what I find refuge in. This is what I have faith in, this divine truth of oneness, of connection, and that if there is only one, that means that I am that one, that I am that expression. I am all that there is, this sense of love and peace and wholeness and health and healing. I know that I am stirred in this very moment to speak this word and to know this truth for each person within the sound of my voice, within our community and beyond, that each person is that divine expression of one. And together we are such a powerful expression of that one to bring forth peace and healing and love, to step forward in what it is ours to do in this world to heal our own sense of separation, to find ways to heal the separation in our country and in our world, to stand in that truth of love and peace and wholeness and unity and oneness and equity. This is the truth that I claim, and I know that we go forward from this day, uh, lifted up by that divine truth of oneness, lifted up by knowing that we are harnessed to the divine presence, that we are safe in all that we do. And as we face whatever fear might come up for us, we step into that truth of our divine nature, building our resilience through our practice, doing this work together as community. As we go forth, we are loved and we are love. We are love expressing. This is what I'm so grateful for in this moment. This is what I'm so grateful for, to speak this word, to know this truth, to remember to go back to the knowingness that we indeed are lifted up by this love. And for this, I'm so grateful. And so it is.